Now, let's get to media and the siege. It's a question. Let's listen to this. We'll be right back.
For us, the victory of the 28th of December is not a victory for the NPP. It's a victory for democracy and for Ghana. That's a very much more important victory for us. The victory of the 28th of December is not a victory for the NPP. It's a victory for democracy and for Ghana. That's a very much more important victory than the victory of whoever is temporarily for 3 or 4 years occupying the seat of power.
I think Nana should tell this to Mr. Kufuor. He was on Vibe today, and they asked him, if he would accept the outcome. And he said that if things were normal, then he should emerge as president. That is a very dangerous opinion to hold, that you can only emerge as president if things are normal.
I, John Dramani Mahama.
Vice President John Mahama took over from late President Mills with a lot of promise because of his often touted membership of the Inky fraternity.
The media, in addition to its various other roles and responsibilities, also quite often serves as a messenger of the people, bringing to light many issues that are of relevance and immediate concern to the Ghanaian public.
Indeed, it was under him in 2014 that Ghana had its best World Press Freedom Ranking, published by Reporters Without Borders.
A member of the multimedia group was Thursday assaulted by an official of the National Health Insurance Authority at Ablekuma here in Accra.
On the other hand, it was the same year that Adom FM news editor Efia Pokua and 2 others were attacked by NIA officials. Again, assault on a journalist by presidential staffer Stan Dogbe and murder of radio broadcaster George Abanga in September 2015 were cited as cases contributing to Ghana's drop in the World Press Freedom Ranking by the US-based Freedom House that year. For General Manager of the Chronicle newspaper, Ebo Kwanzaa, these were signs that the agents of the dark days were still lurking around.
He is a communication expert, and I think he will want to promote media freedom. But as I said, some elements.
Okay, so I understand this file has been corrupted somewhat. So we'll get to you the full of this file for you to get to listen to. But this is where I like to start. On July 2, 2019. Okay, let's finish watching and listening to this.
I think he will want to promote media freedom. But as I said, some elements of the darkness who promoted the culture of darkness were still around.
If we joined President
yes. I mean, they were lurking around, so there were 1 or 2 infractions. But I think he did well.
Mr. Speaker, it is to meet.
2016 saw some legal developments favorable to press freedom. In June, the government withdrew the Interception of Postal Packets and Telecommunications Messages Bill, known as the Spy Bill, from parliamentary consideration. In November, the Supreme Court struck down 2015 Content Standards Regulations issued by the NMC, saying they were tantamount to a censorship regime.
It is my duty and my privilege to declare Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo as the President-elect of the Republic of Ghana.
President Akufo-Addo's assumption of the highest office of the land was good news for media freedom, since he was the Attorney General who appealed the criminal and seditious libel laws.
As Attorney General, under the government of the great Ghanaian statesman, His Excellency John Agyekum Kufuor, the second President of the Fourth Republic, I led the process in Parliament for the repeal of the criminal libel law. The repeal, when it occurred on 27 July 2001, was a very happy day for me, representing one of the high points of my public career.
Indeed, after so many years, the Right to Information Bill was passed into law. Despite these laurels, there have been deepening worries about attacks on the media and other forms of infractions that have reared their ugly heads under this administration. Ghana has recorded at least 41 violations of media rights between February 2017 and March 2019. From the murder of Ahmed Swale through the assault of Latif Idris and 20 others to the attack on media houses, and for the first time in the Fourth Republic, the eventual shutdown of radio stations including non-opposition media groups like Radio Gold and Radio XYZ.
So they held you like this?
Yes, so this way. And they asked me to sit. So I sat. So now they could have their free way to slap me.
That's not all. There have also been detentions, threats, torture, and the seizure of equipment, all under this government. These violations have prompted critics and champions of media freedom like Dr. Charles Rekubrobe and Harunata to predict a return to the culture of silence.
It reminds me of a Dubois Hines culture of silence. You know, the government of the party that believed in the rule of law and the freedom of speech and expression and Kabi and everything is inadvertently, because I have no evidence to suggest that it has taken specific divisions, but it's inadvertently recreating a culture of silence in Ghana.
Because of the pressure he is under now, he may now sit up and see that, look, things are not going well, and then start letting his people, maybe he's not even the one, but his people, to start modifying their attitude to the media.
This government can still turn the tide around, but will it? Well, time will tell.
You're welcome back. So I want to start with Suleiman Ibrahim, the Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa, the sub-regional group. Now, on July 2, 2019, this is a publication on your website. Critical times for press freedom in Ghana as violations near alarming proportions. And I'll take my time to read it and ask you why you generated this. You said, events unfolding in Ghana over the past 18 months paint a gloomy picture of the press freedom situation in the country. Attacks on journalists have been rampant and severe. There is a growing sense of intimidation of the media and a growing culture of intolerance for dissenting views. There has been arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement of laws to shut down mainly pro-opposition media outlets. The independent broadcast media industry has been battling government over industry crippling policy proposals. During the 18-month period, the Media Foundation for West Africa has documented 31 cases of violations against journalists. Now we know the status is 40 plus. Against journalists and media houses. The attacks have involved over 40 victims, as some attacks involve multiple individuals. The majority of these violations have been physical attacks and severe threats. There has also been one incident of murder, and for the first time in over a decade, the Media Foundation for West Africa had to provide a safe haven support for a Ghanaian journalist who faced death threats. In the latest of a series of very sad developments for media freedom in Ghana, national security operatives on 27 June 2019 stormed the offices of an online media, modernghana.com, and arrested 2 of its staff, including a deputy editor. The operatives, who did not present any warrant, arrested the journalists, blindfolded them, and took them to offices of the national security. The journalists have subsequently reported that they were tortured. Whatever crime the media house and or its journalists might have committed, the Rambo-style raid, arrests, seizure of equipment, and arbitrary detentions, and above all, the reported torture of the journalists are a sad spectacle, which is typical of military and autocratic regimes. These are unimaginable developments in Ghana, a country with a globally respected human rights and press freedom records. Apart from the rampant abuses against journalists, the current government has also sought to introduce a number of unfriendly media industry policies. On June 6, 2019, for example, the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association, GIBA, and other stakeholders had to convene a forum to contest a draft policy by the government that seeks to encrypt all free-to-air television channels in the country and to grant conditional access to viewers subject to the payment of digital access fees. The convening of the forum by GIBA followed attempts by the government to implement the draft policy despite the concerns expressed by broadcast industry players about the negative implications of the implementation of the draft policy on the survival of the local broadcast industry. Indeed, the implementation of the said draft policy would impact negatively on the ability of the majority of citizens to access television content. In May, the National Communication Authority, NCA, shut down a number of radio stations in an arbitrary and discriminatory manner. In a non-transparent exercise, the authority shut down the two main pro-opposition radio stations in the capital at a time when the said radio stations were providing live coverage of an event by the main opposition party. These developments have the potential of reintroducing the once dreaded culture of silence in the country. They also affect the capability of the media to be critical players in the growth of the country's nascent democracy. Democracy cannot certainly thrive without press freedom. Governments that truly uphold the fundamental principles of democracy should certainly appreciate the importance of a free media and must at all times act in ways that not only guarantee press freedom, but support media development. Your final paragraph, you say, the Media Foundation for West Africa calls the President of the Republic to take a personal interest in the ongoing development in the media space and personally intervene to ensure that press freedom and safety of journalists are fully guaranteed. The creeping culture of attacks, intimidation, threats, and censorship must cease, and perpetrators must be punished to end the culture of impunity. Where's the evidence for this?
Well, I think these are developments that are quite obvious, and those who follow developments within the media space know about this. For example, the convening of GIBA at Alisa Hotel, to protest the intended introduction of, encrypted television and ending the regime of free-to-air television is something that is obvious. And subsequently, I think the industry players have actually started playing an ad, to protest that particular development. In terms of the incidents of violations, these are documented, and on our website, there's even a breakdown that you can basically look at them. So, for example, the summarized versions will tell you on July 2, 2017, TV3 crew, a three-member crew from TV3, and their names are there. May Paul Sowa, Richmond Tando, and Peter Asare was assaulted by some suspected landguards while they were investigating encroachment on a piece of land. On July 3, photojournalist assaulted and camera destroyed. The name is there, where he works is there, where it happened is there. On October 10, 2017, chief assaults journalist over WhatsApp criticism. It's something that is documented and is available. This cannot be contested. The names of the victims are there, where it happened, where they work, why it happened, all are listed. So these are developments that are there.
Just last week, a journalist at TV3 also reported that he had been attacked by a church or church people.
Yes.
2 weeks ago, Dela Russell Oklu, Daily Graphic, also was attacked in a church, and the process is going on. Why is that to blame? Is government to blame for that?
Well, in fact, our database, I must clarify that, for example, the journalist who was alleged to have been attacked by these church members, when we went through the report, we did not include it because this person was attacked not for doing the business of journalism. He was attacked by, criminals or people who decided to take the law into their own hands because they thought he had parked at a place that they were not convenient or they were not comfortable with, and in the process that resulted. So it wasn't because he was there doing journalistic work and because of that he was attacked. And so such incidents would not even be documented as constituting a press freedom violation. Now, it's also important to look at the history. And we have that database from, for example, the last 4 years of President Kufuor, President Mills, President Mahama. And now, if you take the last 4 years of President Kufuor, 2005 to 2008, we had 63 incidents of violations. That's quite high. And in fact, so far, that is the highest. Now, if you take President Mills, 3.5 years, but you add the final half year that Mahama did, that was 56 incidents of violations against the media. President Mahama, 4 years, 2012, 2016, 44. And now President Akufo-Addo, 3.5 years, we are around 42. So almost, toppling the record of President Mahama within the 4 years. And these are verifiable facts. These are, data. This is data that is available. You can go and look at them from, so as I have here for the period of President Akufo-Addo, on February 27, this happened, March 5, March 6, June 27, June 30, and you can call the people who were victims to ask them whether these things happened. So these are not, facts that can be contested.
So my question is, are you blaming government? And we know that there are only a few of the instances which involve government operatives.
Yeah. No, you see, we're talking about the operating environment. And everywhere when there are conversations about press freedom, and for example, the recent meeting in London, where government officials convened to discuss issues of press freedom, it wasn't on the basis that it is government officials who perpetrate the acts. It is government that is supposed to, provide the enabling environment for press freedom to thrive. Now, in 2014, when Stan Dogbe, then presidential staffer, abused a journalist, we took up the matter, petitioned the president, and it was because we thought this was a classic case of somebody in a position of government, having committed a certain, offense against media. And so we demanded that the government at the time should take action. Nothing happened. So the culture of impunity, that has surrounded us over the years is what is giving cause to, what we are witnessing. And in fact, I must say that even as the absolute numbers may indicate perhaps it shouldn't be something that we say is worse in terms of the last 20 or so years, we must also look at the gravity of the violations. Within this period, we've had a case of murder. We've had to, support a journalist to leave the country on the basis of very severe threat. And as we speak, that journalist still works with a police officer. I mean, I don't remember the last time we had such a situation where, we have to provide a safe haven for a Ghanaian journalist, and even on his return, he has to be accompanied by a police officer. The question is, if people are denying it, why is government providing that kind of support to the journalist? So the gravity and the level of intolerance, is becoming a culture by itself. And who else do we blame? The government has to create that enabling environment in terms of making sure that perpetrators are punished. The Swale case, what has happened? And when we talk about the police being the institution to investigate, we cannot say that the police is not a state agency or the government, therefore should not be roped in because it is the police. That's a state agency. And so what we want to see, and when we called on the president to take a personal interest, that is something that is also significant. It's a worry that all these things are happening, and we haven't had an occasion where the president himself would even make a statement that what is happening is worrying and therefore we should take steps to correct them. It isn't happening. And when you talk about it these days, what you hear is that, no, we want responsible journalism. It should be responsible journalism. We are not saying it is not important. It is important. But are we then saying that journalists is right to beat up journalists, to arrest journalists, to have what happened, by national security operatives, storming a media house, picking up journalists, seizing their equipment, blindfolding them, and taking them to national security, whatever, keeping them there for whatever period. Then upon pressure, they are brought out, and then some flimsy excuse of what? They are involved in cybersecurity, whatever, when nobody has complained, and then a court case is filed, they go to court on the same day, then the government's legal representation says, well, we want to discontinue the case. Until now, we don't know what is happening. And we know that this particular media organization had published something, against or on the national security minister, and they had been called to pull it down. I mean, even that certainly is an action of censorship. If you're not happy, you can decide to write a rejoinder, you can petition the National Media Commission, or you can go to court. But to call a media house directly and say, I'm not happy with this particular publication and therefore take it down, I don't know why they even agreed to take it down, unless they thought, well, based on the facts, we realized that we didn't get it right. So if you look at the incidents of attacks, murder...
When the national security is petitioned, in that case you are referring to, the other part of the story that people may not have paid attention to is that the Modern Ghana website has a columnist who writes, and all his articles are dedicated to the University of Education problems. And most of them, he takes on an MP for being the one creating all the problems and revealing certain things. Now, there was a petition from a chief's palace asking them to stop what they were doing against the MP and the gentleman for continuing to publish what he was publishing. That petition was copied to the national security. So it meant that once they have been copied, they could take action. What's wrong with that?
No, I mean, yes, I mean, if you can take action, the law permits certain actions to be taken. And therefore, if what was done was on the basis of law, I mean, we would have no cause to complain. If, as we sit here, you know, something is shown to be criminal, and therefore the police decide that they are inviting something for allowing this thing to happen. Well, that's the law permits. But if, as we are here, we say something or we publish something and all we see is national security storming here, you know, team of police outside there, people are arrested here, blindfolded, taken away, and the next thing we hear is that they have access to a certain media organization's website and so on and so forth. Certainly this is not something that is tenable.
Okay.
And besides, you know, for me, one other thing that is so worrying is the shutdown of these radio stations.
Okay. You hold on, I'll come back to you on that, but let me hear from Buabinga Samoa also. The shutdown of the radio stations, we know that it is due process of law that is being used. You are also against the policy that Geba is complaining about. The ministry and the NCA don't find problems with what they are doing. They have been voted into office to work for the country. So if people with other interests or, like they say, commercial interests are complaining, why should they listen to them? You're also not happy about the reduction of the radius of the stations that operate 100 kilometers into 45. Also, they will tell you they are using the law to get what has to be done. So what's your problem with that? We'll come to you to answer those questions. Yes, yeah.
Samson, this is a very important matter to the entire panel, including you. He's a senior journalist, in quotes. And
you mean Tarzan is a senior journalist?
In the sense that one of the reasons why we are sitting here is because of the actions he took.
Right.
With Kandapa included at that time.
Radio
to
Eye.
expand Radio Eye. Kandapa was included, the current Minister of National Security. So there must be something at stake here. And then Suini, I've had occasion to be grilled several times by him on Radio Gold. Excellent panel, moderator, emulating you. And obviously, the technician who was groomed by Kwam Kakari. This matter, where we stand now, we've had eminent people, Kwenye here, Kwam Kakari, Charlie Brobst, Tarzan himself, and I just saw a clip of Harunata, who used to be the editor of the Statesman, which belonged then to the presidential candidate of the New Patriotic Party. Even then, he wasn't yet a presidential candidate, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo. So, what I'm driving at is that, one, there's no end game of benefit to a New Patriotic Party government headed by Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo in going head-to-head with the media and bringing down the pillars of media freedom that they themselves helped to build. What is the end game? In this current environment, no government can plan and organize an assault on the media, where all of us are citizens. If it's the most eclectic environment, everybody is involved. And it's our constitutional mandate to uplift and protect that media space for the benefit of all of us. No government can suppress that edge. No government can go against the rules in a sustainable manner and have an end game that benefits it. So I am stating here and now that the NPP government, led by Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, a personal champion of media freedom, cannot have in mind a planned progressive process to dislocate the media from its constitutional rights through violence or otherwise. Indeed, it's an amazing contradiction, because you also have the same person who is leading this government just having signed into law a major piece of legislation that will open up the media space and explode it even further after he led the repeal of criminal libel, which blew up the media space. He has just signed the RTI into law. Right to information, bringing to life Article 21 of the 1992 Constitution. 17 years in Parliament, spanning how many administrations? And can we confidently say that this man is the one who, because he hasn't spoken, because he hasn't said something, is deliberately running a process to engage the media head on and damage his personal reputation as well as the collective reputation of the New Patriotic Party, which from the beginning fought through powerful persons like Tarzan, Kandapa included, other people we know, I won't mention here, they are not here, fought. And indeed, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo has been a legal person in this process, applying the force of law and expanding the space consistently, including the court cases. Apart from the legal institutional structures, the court cases, GBC, where he fought for the right of political parties to air their political views on the then Holy State channel, including his defenses of Tommy Thompson and our Vivier Kwekubakon and others. The man has been there. I want to emphasize that the man has been there, and the man has no interest whatsoever.
You are saying, you mentioned that he's been faulted for being silent.
Yes.
And are you not worried that you hear persons like Professor Karakari, like Dr. Charles Rekobrobe here, and people that you have great respect for in the media landscape, say that he ought to speak, particularly at a time when people in his government are suddenly preaching what Sulemana referred to, responsible journalism. Sulemana, I've heard Sulemana give a response once and said, the journalism has not changed. The journalism that was there when you were in opposition has not changed. So where from this, rush to always say journalists must be responsible without even first seeking to solidarize with some of the violations that happen?
Excellent. I was coming to that. Just when you broke in with your question, it even focuses it further. I was listening to the statistics. Kufuor, 63, the absolute figures. Kufuor, 63. Mills, 56. Mahama, 44. And Nana at 42. Of the lot, it's at 42. It hasn't hit 44 yet. And then there's
42 at 2 years.
Yes.
2.5.
Suppose it ends tomorrow. Suppose nothing happens tomorrow. No, I'm trying
and that's
to...
That's just about attacks.
Yes.
Doesn't include the other things they talk about.
But he raised, when you asked him about that, he raised a very important thing, that they're also looking beyond quantity and looking at quality.
Right.
It's also, to some extent, a bit subjective. To the extent that you want to examine and determine that this incident was more horrendous than that incident, you tend to introduce a bit of subjectivity, because you can't have an objective criteria to determine, for example, that a journalist was murdered, and that murder was more gruesome in this regime than this murder in Nana Addo's regime. Samuel Enning, the Ashanti regional president of the GJA, was murdered in Kumasi. Was that more gruesome than Ahmed, is it Swale? Is Ahmed Swale's murder more gruesome than that of the gentleman who was killed in Sunyani, who was shot on his motorbike in 2015? I am trying to recollect his name.
The question they ask is that this one, there is a straight connection. He has done work that somewhat has not been that good for certain people, and that people who are influential in this government, MP, were those who blew his cover, and the president hasn't said anything. That's what they are saying.
You see, that is where the subjectivity comes in. When you begin to presume that certain linkages presume certain conclusions, and that in that sense the president must be linked to the back end of the MP or something. The president, when this matter came up, reported his version of it to the CID. This is to do with the GFA issues. Am I correct?
Right.
Even then,
number 12.
Even then, there were questions about why the president reported to the CID, in what capacity he did, why he was asked to preview it, and all manner of things were said. All manner of things, if you recollect. Yes, his credibility in reporting the matter was questioned. The manner in which he was approached and everything was questioned. So there's a certain heightened sense in the era we live. And I believe that this heightened environment of sensitivity beyond government and right into media is also the upsurge of e-politics, the social media engagement in politics. And it has raised heavily the specter of responsibility, because it is very difficult to police a medium where an individual can literally set the country alight by simply doing something in their room, putting it out there, sharing it, and creating alarm. People become hyper. We have never seen this extent, expansion, space in social media to comment on public affairs, to do what you want to do, and otherwise. We have so many pseudo-journalists, but we are still trying to restrict ourselves to formal journalists, people who are qualified and otherwise. What I'm trying to say is that that very environment you're saying is an issue. It's an environment that has been expanded and literally contaminated by new elements that we all are not in a position to engage effectively in terms of responsibility and accountability. So whilst admitting, as I sit here, that the fluidity of media freedom is always at stake, because we have the figures, we have the absolute figures from every regime. There's no regime where it's been completely free and safe. That is a fluid situation, it's dynamic. We are also in an era where the environment is being impacted. Contrary to the assumption that the journalism remains the same, now it is not quite the same. Now opinion easily shades into fact. Opinion easily shades into fact. We have situations where investigative journalists are running documentaries which look like movies. They are they are trailing them, pre-advertising them, creating anticipation and all that. We are in a new era. And so when a documentary that is being premiered literally in pieces before it comes out creates the impression that everything in that is conclusive, and most of it is opinion, and most of it is determined by some sort of tenuous linkages that are being presumed and otherwise, people get a little nervous. People get genuinely nervous. So it is not enough to be nervous and to go over the top. That should be condemned. But we should also admit that we are in a situation where the boundaries are expanding very fast and it is very fluid. Something, it is very, very, very fluid. Let us look at these closures, Radio Gold and otherwise. I think the biggest problem GJA had was that they were airing a live program when they were shut down. GJA has not disputed. No, GJA has not disputed that the rule of law had to prevail and that they were breaking the law. As we sit here, is it a fact that several radio stations, including those two, were broadcasting illegally per the rules that we have. NCA rules on frequencies and the Electronic Tribunal's conclusions after they went there. Those institutions themselves went to the Electronic Tribunal. It wasn't the NCA who went to the Electronic Tribunal. Those institutions who were fined went to the Electronic Tribunal, and the Electronic Tribunal ruled that if your authorization had expired and you had not taken steps to renew before expiry and you were still on air, you were broadcasting illegally. 2, in seeking after that to go forward, you could not renew by the mere fact that you were already on air before. But once that expired to that extent, you had to submit a fresh application. This is the rules according to the Electronic Tribunal.
And the questions that the industry players are asking among other, citizens is this. If, like somebody suggests, that in the banking sector, financial sector,
right,
it is becoming as if reviewing a situation, the word review is synonymous to collapse. So to review something simply means collapsing. Now, the question they are asking is,
banking sector review means collapse.
The question they are asking is, so even if the tribunal says, once you did not renew when your time was up to renew, once you are coming to renew after the time for renewal has expired, you will only be treated as a fresh applicant.
Right.
Meaning you lose your old license.
Yeah.
Is there not a way to work with that entity in such a way that you don't have to shut them down and ask them to apply again fresh for you to now determine whether you will give them or you won't give them?
But Samson, if just a moment. You see, on that particular issue, I think Honorable is right when he talks about applying the law. But in applying the law, what one expects is that it will be applied equitably, fairly, and whoever is culpable is punished the same way. On that day when Radio Gold and XYZ were shut, Radio Gold is 1995, XYZ 2011, the first time they got their authorization. So if you take Radio Gold, 1995, they were supposed to have renewed in 2000, 2015, 2010, 2005, 2010, and 2015. XYZ got it 2011, so the first time they had to renew was 2016, which they didn't. Then if you take, and for purposes of, the politics of it, if you take, let's say, Oman FM, 2006, the first renewal would have been 2011, the next one would have been 2016. So on that day, I went to the NCA's database, their own website, to look at what stations, are active, when was their authorization given, when were they due for the renewal, and so on and so forth. And I looked at a number of stations that were listed whose authorization had not been renewed, and yet they were on air. So the question that I asked the lady was, what is the criteria for determining which one is shut down and which one is not shut down? And initially she was like, okay, let me get back to you, because later when she got back to me, there was no any cogent explanation. So the question is, if the tribunal had ruled that if you did not renew your authorization at the time when you were supposed to have done it, and therefore you are broadcasting illegally, why are some allowed to continue to broadcast whilst others have been shut down?
Okay.
That for me
so
is
thank
the
you,
question. Taking off on that, the question also is that it wasn't only those two stations that were shut down. It wasn't only those two stations that were shut down. So when we begin to pitch it politically, we create situations. My FM is MPP. My FM is not owned by the New Patriotic Party. It's not owned by the New Patriotic Party.
But I think we have to
if we have, we have perceptions.
I'm not doing this because
Sule, we have a right. This is the environment in which we are. We have a right to make these, what do you call it, to make these statements or otherwise. What I'm also saying is that the NCA has shut down several stations. If the NCA shut down those other stations on the presumption that they were MPP and DC, then we have a big problem. We have a huge problem. If the NCA is shutting down stations on the basis of who is MPP and who is NDC, then they would have to come out and tell us the political affiliation of all those stations. Unless some stations are being sacrificed in order to present an objective, quasi-objective front that this is not political. Otherwise, if we just label them, those particular two, as being political and compare it to another one which is on air because it is also deemed to be political, what about the others who have been shut down?
Okay.
What is the impact on them? Is it fair to them to assume that they can be shut down for no reason and that they won't have any protection because they don't have political links? So I think that, yes, much as the enforcement of the rule.
Which other radio stations are you talking about?
Yeah,
and where do they belong in the scheme of things?
Exactly.
That's the question.
And we ask them to publish their list.
That's the question I'm saying now. There are those, and without any disrespect, that the critics say, until you announce that they had been collapsed, they had been shut down, nobody heard of them.
Well, so it means they are vulnerable. It means they don't have protection. It means they don't have the apparent patina of being labeled MPP or NDC. So probably they are CPP or PPP, and they are not being protected by anybody.
Interesting.
So let us see the balance where we apply the law, how it's applied, whether we can derogate the law from the law in implementing it without changing it.
Okay.
And the leeway that the NCA has. But to the extent that several stations have been shut down, it is important that we don't elevate some on the basis of politics alone. We have a right, we have a right to our conclusions, we have a right to our suppositions, but we can't say that that is a fact. That it is a fact that XYZ and Radio Gold were shut down because they are affiliated to the NDC.
Okay, thank you. So, Sohini, what's your take on the developments as being canvassed now, and what do you also say to those issues that are being raised? Giba says things are happening that are not good. In fact, the GJA did not only say because they were live. That was its problem. It said more than that, that there was a way that the situation could be handled rather than an approach to a direct shutdown. And some of those that have also, you asked the question, Suleimana, some of those that also had expired license but were not shut down, there may be some explanation to that, because this particular platform was supposed to have been shut down, but they went to court and got an injunction against the NCA until a judgment was given to say that they are okay, they can do their work, and then they filed an appeal. So maybe where you are listening now, you may not have gotten to listen to. Yes, yes.
You know, Samson, my response initially to the historical accolades of our president that Mr. Boabeng heaped on him is that for me, those accolades, media champion, corruption fighter, are some of the reasons why his presidency is such a legendary anticlimax. You know, for many who thought that he was going to do better based on these accolades. It is the reason why it is such a legendary anticlimax. And it reminds me of Michelle Obama's words when he says that, you know, power doesn't change people. It only reveals who they are. So for me, it's as if he was a man created by the media, you know, based on hype. And the power seemed to be revealing to us who really he has been all along.
Interesting.
But in this discussion,
just sends me a message and he says that Lucifer was an angel. So don't depend on someone's past, you know, whatever it is. Is that the way to look at it? We examine you because of who you are, and we trust you with that.
Yeah.
So expect that you continue to be that way.
Yeah.
What has the president as an individual done wrong?
Exactly. Yeah, I will tell you what he's done wrong. But I think, again, in this discussion, it's important for us to celebrate our forebears. I mean, fortunately for us, we have one of them who I will call the grandfather of electronic media.
He'll be the last to speak, especially all of you are done.
Especially in this fourth republic. And we should also be celebrating people like Charles Bannerman, J.H. Brew, Timothy Lane, for, you know, the efforts that they put into establishing Ghana to become, one of the safest places to practice journalism until, of course, recently. I think that it is important that we do not allow the sacrifices that they put into establishing this country as a media haven to go to waste. And I was initially disturbed that, voices of reason were not speaking up as strongly as I was expecting them to, especially because of how, even military governments were resisted in their attempts to stifle media freedoms. And so for us to be in a democracy and to witness all the things that were happening, leading even to our country losing the enviable position as being Africa's best place to practice journalism, I was quite worried that the voices were not coming up. And so I must commend your media house for reaching out to some of them and getting them, even if they did it diplomatically, but to still state that we were in very dangerous times and there was a need for, something to be done about it. But you see, I'm not too, disturbed by the obvious or overt threats, intimidations, torture, and even the deaths that have been recorded, because these are tangible. These are, obvious for everybody to see and to condemn and to expect that, the state authorities, do something. But I am more worried about what I think is not that overt, and that has to do with the application of legislation. And it reminds me not only of the 1992 Constitution, Article 162, that's Chapter 12, that is devoted to, the media freedoms, but also of a recent report that, I saw, not so recent, I think it's a 2010 report of the Freedom House, and Freedom House is a reputable international agency that also monitor press freedom around the world. And the title of that report, the 2010 report, was License to Censor the Use of Media Regulation to Restrict Press Freedom. License to censor the use of media regulation to restrict press freedom. Now, if you look at Chapter 12, Article 162(2), I think, of the Constitution, talks about how no government has the right to censor, any media house. So for me, it is instructive that in this 2010 report of the Freedom House, its introduction captures something that I think we should all, avert our minds to as we discuss the operations of the NCA. And I will just, with permission, read just the first paragraph of the introduction of that report titled License to Censor the Use of Media Regulation to Restrict Press Freedom. It says, in some parts of the world, the threats to press freedom are explicit and often violent. Journalists are murdered or imprisoned. States maintain strict media monopolies, and domestic audiences are cut off from foreign news sources. Such unambiguously hostile conditions typically elicit strong responses from international advocacy groups and democracies that are committed to defending freedom of expression. However, and that is where it is, however, in a much broader range of countries, governments are using the more subtle tools of media regulation to restrict press freedom, maintaining a veneer of legality and pluralism that is less likely to draw attention or criticism from abroad. Manipulation of the regulatory framework allows leaders to either tolerate or rein in influential news outlets, depending on the political situation, and permits even democratically elected governments to fortify themselves against future electoral competition. That's the first paragraph. And for me, this situates so well in even the discussion that we just witnessed here about the selective application of what we call legality or law in the closure of stations, and the rebuttal that the NCA is supplying law, so shut up. Even though there is evidence that even in the so-called application of the law, there's selectivity, where you have some stations that are considered favorable. When they, flout the regulation, there is a way that their situation or case is ameliorated so that they continue practicing. And for me, my understanding of regulation is not to prioritize punishment over correction. Regulation, I believe, seek to promote corrective behavior and not, so much focus on punitive actions. And that is why in the past, I have heard media owners, and I heard so much of it around the time that the NCA began this closure of over 100 stations. Media owners, indicated that there have been times in the past where maybe by virtue of a story that they have done, some overzealous, workers of these state institutions have tried to apply the law in the way that we see it being applied now, but people higher than them, when they were reached, called those overzealous, staffers to order. And so those stations were simply made to go through the process, that is the corrective process, and without the hula baloo and the noise that we are hearing now. So it tells you that with such a regulation in place, a democratic government, like it's been done now, can use it to abuse, can abuse it to, further its political interests. Instead of using it to correct the system, to improve upon the landscape, we are having a situation where this government, and that is why the president can be held responsible. Because you see, the president is an embodiment of the Ghanaian law as we speak. And so any abuse of that law will require at least some intervention. But if he looks on, like we see him being indifferent about the happenings, it only tells us that indeed power is revealing to us who he really is. And for me, I am not too surprised because you see, and it's not because I am NDC, but I have never really been caught up by that hype because I have followed his politics even in opposition. And I have noticed how even within his political party, if he doesn't show it, but his body language have sought to encourage people to be very intolerant of even his own party people who have been critical of him. Because
so what are you saying? That the president should tell the NCA, the communication ministry, and the other, legal bodies that don't apply the laws?
No, what I'm saying, Samson, is that, like I recounted the, narrations of some media owners in the past, when overzealous staff try to abuse the law, that is an abuse of a regulation.
Point of information that could help all of us.
You have superior authorities.
Just a second.
There's a point of information that could help all of us.
Okay.
Just like Joy FM went to court.
Joy and Asempa FM. Yeah.
Yes. You know that those two went to court, and that matter has not been resolved, and therefore dealing with this matter.
Radio Gold and Radio XYZ?
They are in court. And nobody can override the court process. Okay. Neither the president nor the NCA can override the court process unless they withdraw voluntarily from court.
Okay, so what's the point?
The point I'm making is that the assumption that nothing could have been done, and that is being deliberate, is that they have taken a certain course of action to preserve rights that
the point is making is that we shouldn't have been here in the first place.
Yeah, but once they are in court, then it means that they are also taking a step that disables any attempt at mediating it outside the rules.
That's not correct. You're a lawyer. You're a lawyer. You know that. You know that
They must come out of court first.
You know that even judgments can be compromised. Yeah, even when you get a judgment, the two parties can decide to say, you have a judgment, but we don't want to implement
something.
Right.
Yeah. You also know that once you are in court,
yes,
you need to actively engage, because you cannot say that I have done this outside the court process, particularly the one you are inveighing against. You understand what I'm saying? The person who went to court must express a willingness to resolve out of court.
Okay, so it's on both parties' sides, but normally it is the one who went to court who may try to do that
I
first.
want to introduce that element.
Thank you.
That they are not lying down. They are in court.
You
finish
see,
up.
where he gets it wrong is that these two stations did not even have the opportunity to go to court. Because you see, in the case of Radio XYZ, for example, I've listened to their management, and they have indicated the number of times they made efforts to regularize, and how every step of the way officials at the NCA frustrated their attempts to regularize. And so they did not even have a hint that they were going to be shut down until that unholy or holy afternoon. They had military men or policemen, you know, in, I think they were in a bomb squad.
Why don't you understand that they try twice with bankers' drafts or checks to give to them to say we are applying to renew.
Right.
And what the NCA was telling them is that you cannot be coming to renew because the tribunal, the NCA's tribunal, has ruled that once your license expired,
I think
before
you came,
you are supposed to apply as a fresh applicant.
There are two scenarios. Their first attempt to regularize was, happened
before the ruling.
Okay.
But after they were fined.
But you see, and the NCA was engaging them and delaying the process, I believe, deliberately, so that when the ruling came, they then used the ruling as reason not to regularize them. And that is why, and that is why,
let's have
and that is why I am saying that we need to first of all understand that regulation is not to prioritize punishment over corrective behavior.
Okay,
and so if you had these stations attempting to, regularize, you did not have to delay them unduly so that you get a ruling that will strengthen you to punish them.
Okay.
If your intention was not to stifle that media house simply because you find it too critical.
Okay, thank you. So hold it there, and let's get Dr. Rekubode in here.
All right.
So he will come in, and I will only return to all of you for very brief, not more than 2 minutes before we draw the curtains on this particular subject and move on to Rosewood discussion. Now, if I can begin with you on two of the issues, not the physical attacks by police and other people or government agents, persons involved. I've heard you also. Is it your suggestion that the ministry should not be pursuing the policy it is seeking to pursue now? It is giving the mandate by law and by the state to act. They are pursuing a policy, GIBA, which has a commercial interest, says Ghanaians will be denied the opportunity to free to air. So we should not agree with them. And the second issue, I've heard you on that one too. They are saying that there are about a dozen radio stations. They are your biggest radio stations in town, the popular ones. Joy FM, City FM, and those big ones, Peace FM. They are saying that they have a policy where they want to reduce their radius, their coverage area, from 100 kilometers to 45 kilometers. So your reach is now going to be limited to 45. Why should we buy the political claim or, imputations that they just want to use that to create more radio stations for their members, rather than say they want a system that works?
There is also quick information from Radio Gold management that they are not in court, like he always suggests.
Yes. Okay, they are presently not in court. Yes,
they are presently not in court. But
let's hear Dr. Charles Rekubode. Yeah.
Let me take you back, because I think this discussion is a little bit lost on me, to be honest with you. Let's go back to Chapter 12 of our Constitution. The framers of the Constitution deliberately, in the first sentence of Chapter 12, freedom and independence of the media are guaranteed. Freedom of speech, independence from authority. And it set out how this should be done. It created a National Media Commission to be the mediator of, and it wanted to shield the media from executive or governmental control. And there was a purpose for this. And ironically, if indeed many of the actions the NCA had done had been taken by the National Media Commission, I think it would have been more understood. The NCA is a governmental institution. It is headed by a minister of state. Therefore, it is part of the executive.
You mean it is overseen,
no,
supervised by a minister of state,
but
not
yes,
headed by a minister of state?
Well, whatever word you want to use, it is part of the executive.
What I mean is that Joe Anoche is not a minister of state.
Oh, doesn't, no, of
okay,
course it's
thank
not
you.
a minister of state, but you know. But it is under the Ministry of Communications. Explicitly, the Constitution says, shield the media from executive control. And so, from the word go, that's what I've always said. We got pluralism. Fine. There's a lot of free speech. Fine. But the independence was attempted to be stifled from the word go. Because the NCA law, the way it was framed, despite what my friend Tuduribu Kwachi said, that the Media Commission will be allowed to allocate frequencies, this was put under the NCA. And so the whole process of deciding who should and should not be a media house has become a subject of control by the executive. You say that Anoche is not. Anoche was appointed by the president, as was the chairman, as under our constitution, every board of directors must change. So it's under executive control, whichever way you want to look at it. My fear is that what is happening is opening the sluice gate for future executives to also interfere with the media. And so, from the word go, when the NCA law was set up, we actually went to Parliament, myself, Ayeboafo, and Yao, and said that simply because you are responsible for frequencies, that does not negate the authority of the National Media Commission to be the arbiter of the media space. The frequency, for all you want to know, is determined by the International Telecommunications Union.
Right.
It determines what channels are for broadcasting, what channels are for military communication, what channels are for civil aviation, etc. It is not something that we do here. And the spacing of intervals for radio stations is also determined by the ITU. So it's not rocket science to say that, oh, from 87.5 to 108 point something, which is radio, as part of its function, the National Media Commission, assisted by the NCA technical staff, should make that function and determination. But from the word go, the NDC government, especially led by my friend Tuduribu Kwachi, who gave me the name Tarzan incidentally, decided to place this function under the NCA, so that you had to make your application even for a station under the NCA, which for me was not logical. And so from the word go, you subverted the very intent of the Constitution to shield media away from government. The other point I want to make is that in all this discussion, all of us know the Constitution. It's very, very clear. The executive power of Ghana resides in the President of Ghana. Everybody else in government is an advisor to the President of Ghana. So it is the President of Ghana who sets the scene and who determines, and whose encouragement or otherwise will give succor to others who want to misbehave. If we really intended to follow what the Constitution did, after all, the Civil Aviation Authority has got frequencies it operates on. The NCA does not manage civil aviation in this country. GCA manages it. The military has got frequencies that it operates. NCA doesn't manage it. So I think people who were intent on fulfilling what the Constitution required, that there should be no interference of the executive, would have done so. 25 years of monitoring, every executive which has been in power has tried to force the media to bend to his diktats. We started with the executive trying to sponsor radio stations. It did not work out. But even then, the stations that were not executive sponsored, like Multimedia and Peace and recently City, which have shown great professionalism, have been the ones which have become the opinions that people will listen to or follow. Once the executive control had failed, we've now gone into the attempt to use very nice legal language and flowery words to try and achieve what that isn't achieved. People are using the word authorization. In the English language, authorization and licensing are dukataka. They mean exactly the same. 1623 of our Constitution says there shall be no need for a license.
No requirement.
No requirement. No need. I mean, requirement is a big word. It's very explicit. We went through a legal process championed by the current president. We went from a circuit court right through to the Supreme Court. That's where this word authorization came from. And somebody has now put it into law that you don't need a license, but you need authorization. I mean, what the hell are we talking about here? So, as far as I'm concerned, we need to get back to where the Constitution intended us to be. And I believe that more than anybody else, the current president of Ghana, having been the champion of the fight to restore what the Constitution intended, would be in power the champion of what the Constitution should try to say.
Even where there is authority to sort of authorize. Well, for newspapers and magazines and journals, the NCA, the NMC, has registered some 3,074 so far. When you get to the NCA, when it comes to radio and radio operations, it has issued out some almost 500 of licenses, of authorizations, almost 500 of them. My question to you is, even where there is some bit of regulation of sort as to how you enter, this is how saturated the situation is. Are you saying that we should have a situation where no one at all does anything?
No, go back to where I started. I said the NMC should be doing that, not the NCA. In the same way that the GCAA licenses who can fly an aircraft into and out of Ghana, even though it operates on certain frequencies, the NMC is very capable of saying that 97.7 belongs to Joy and 107 belongs to so and so, as part of the mediation process, as constitutionally enshrined.
You said, what's the name? Journos was appointed by the president, and so what? Now you are promoting NMC.
Yeah.
For the very first time, the NMC is headed by an appointee of the president.
So
if your
that's
logic,
part of the erosion. You see, I'm not talking about personality. Look, the NMC is the only body in this country whose membership is prescribed in the Constitution. The only. And so again, that's an infraction that the president of the day, the fifth president of the republic, has directly appointed the chairman when in fact...
No, he doesn't appoint the chairman.
Yeah.
He appoints these two people, but one of them, for the first time, has become the chairman of the NMC.
He has elected him chairman.
Yeah, but, you know, so we have to be very
That's
sure.
not fair.
He has got the right to nominate people onto the NMC.
The of the NMC too is a problem.
No, I'm sorry, it's constitutionally defined.
Yes,
so let's do that.
Yeah.
So let's if we don't want it, we'll change it. And the issue is, you said he appointed. That's why I say that.
No, it is headed by his appointee.
He has got a right to nominate it.
Right.
Yeah, and maybe his peers decided that.
In their history,
but
in their history, it has not happened.
But there have been antagonism between government appointees and members.
In fact, for once, I will agree that there's nobody better qualified to be chairman of the NMC than the current person.
Right.
His record on press freedom and media freedom is impeccable. He's been one of the fighters for this. Like I said, the first time we went to Parliament to discuss the NCA bill,
it was with him.
He was with me. And even though he was then the executive secretary.
So. Okay. So, let me see how you share the little.
2 minutes.
I'd asked you the questions already, but here, when the issue of the implementation of the cutting down the radios came up, about a dozen of the radio stations took a statement, a petition, to the minister, to the president through the minister. And this is what they said, one paragraph of the statement. They said, the only reason one can think of the further limiting the broadcast radius of incumbent stations is to issue more authorizations. Already, Ghana is easily the most saturated market for FM stations, with 471 authorizations issued as at the end of the third quarter of 2017. Of these, 376 were on air, of which 340 were commercial, not counting GBC stations. In comparison, South Africa has a total of 59 FM stations. Kenya has 118 FM stations, and Nigeria, with a population of 170 million, has 361 FM stations, of which 59 are federal state broadcasters and 34 are university polytechnic stations. So their point was that the federal limiting of these radios is unheard of, and that it doesn't work. Nigeria, 170 million people, compared to Ghana's, is it 30 million we say? Nigeria has 361. Ghana has 471. Because of that, they don't want them to split the 100 radios any further. Is that a good argument to say you want to make, and therefore you are forcing the state actors not to do what they want to do as a new policy?
Well, for me, it will depend on what the reason or the rationale was from on the part of the NCA in saying that, look, we want to cut Joy FM from 100 to 45, versus what the argument presented by the industry players. But I think that from both sides, the industry players certainly have their interest, and the NCA perhaps also has its own agenda. I think in looking at this, what we have to look at as stakeholders is, first of all, is the economy able to support a thriving, vibrant, pluralistic media? Already, yes, we have plural media, but in terms of diversity, are we really having diversity of opinions? And I would say no. And besides, in terms of survival, sustainability of the media industry in this country, I think we are at a very, very critical time where a lot of media houses are really struggling to survive. And talking about quality of journalism, that is also part of the reasons. And for me, I don't see any tangible reason that would compel, for example, an industry regulator to say, cut back from 100 to 40, even if you have been broadcasting over the years, you've gotten your audiences all over, and so on and so forth. So again, we are at a point where it appears to me that the current regime is saying, look, everyone else who had been in power got everything wrong. And we are here to make sure that things are done the way they ought to be done. And I don't think that...
Your final words, these policies, particularly the two of them that the giver is fighting, from where you also stand.
Let me use my 2 minutes to establish a couple of...
We're doing about less
than that. Joe Osei-Usu, the current first deputy speaker of parliament, a station affiliated to him in Bekwai has been shut down under the current system. Dr. Che of Unity Oil, a station affiliated to him has been shut down in Kumasi. He's a big, powerful person. Then the Radio Gold XYZ matters ended up in Parliament before the Communications Committee. As we speak, my understanding is that, and I've seen a letter, if I have time to show you, that the Ministry of Communications made representations to the committee, to the parliamentary committee which was intervening, that the two stations had filed processes before the electronic tribunal, after they withdrew from court. And that disabled the ministry from engaging further. Again, we can look at the subtleties of whether or not you want to go beyond the court process or otherwise. But in doing so, it would appear that the two institutions were creating the impression they didn't have confidence in certain quarters to resolve this matter the way it ought to go. So they were still relying on the hard law themselves. So whilst you can see that law may be subtly manipulated, they themselves are also relying on the law to establish their positions.
What records do they have, apart from the law?
They've been to Parliament.
In such circumstances?
They've been to Parliament. I think that was a very, very important move. And that Parliament ought to have been able to help them. But to conclude, the matters raised by Dr. Reku Brobe, NCA, NMC, and otherwise, the article is not, the Constitution is a finished document. I think we can interrogate those matters. And that covers the context within which GIBA is seeking to engage the Ministry of Communications and otherwise. I think we can always look at what the Constitution says compared to the environment we are creating for authorization. It cannot be limitless. It cannot be limitless.
Thank you.
Some method must be used. It cannot be limitless.
So the method has to be the NMC.
And that's what I'm saying, that we can interrogate those matters. But finally, we have to be fair to Yawayi Boafo. The president didn't appoint him.
Nobody has said
He's an excellent.
He's been corrected. He's been corrected. No, he's been corrected.
Yes.
So you two, and a small one. Those of you who complain that, okay, now they are trying to create cuts, those who are operating, an area of 100 to 45 and so on. Those of you complaining in the government, in the former government, the accusation now is that the licensing is a finite product. You guys distributed almost all of it. Now there's a new government. If they need some, how do they get some? They need to create it. So you may have caused that.
Well, I think that argument will be based on the assumption that there was no transparent way of sharing the frequencies. If people applied, it was not based, it's not as if when a government comes, it selects its people and give them licenses. I think that, well, then maybe it would be interesting to find out when the deputy speaker had his license, for example. It would be interesting to find out.
That certainly is the case.
Okay, so I'm just saying, let us, yes.
That reinforces the
But let me make the point.
In 1 minute.
Please, I think that would be
sorry, 1 minute.
The first time I didn't have enough time, and this one to have reduced it to 1 minute.
No, don't do that. You had a lot of time. You guys think
but okay, let me
doesn't work.
Let me make the point that Radio Gold is not in court as we speak. I have the letters here. Since June, they have reapplied based on the intervention of the Parliamentary Select Committee, and they have not even gotten acknowledgement of their application, and that has to be made clear. And maybe just in 30 seconds to wrap up, I think as a people, that was the point I was going to make when you interjected the first time. In opposition, we ignored the president's intolerance of people who criticize him. We ignored it in opposition because of that media hype. Mr. Tarzan here is one of the people who suffered that intolerance. Okay. You have Paul Afoko and others suffering that intolerance. Oh. And so when you find it, you see,
we're going quite well. Where you are headed now,
people who criticize him, it is obvious that people who criticize him, people who criticize him suffer some level of intolerance.
So thank you.
So when you have it being manifested in government, when you have it being manifested in government through the media criticism, it should not surprise you. So
this is below the standard.
You do not set the standard. I think if the standard is anything to go by, you don't fix to be on it. If there is anything to go by, you are not right to be on it.
I can't.
Yes, but the point. Yes, but
please. Okay. So please do.